Tune in to this week's episode of the DevOps Lab. We're going to combine the awesomeness of Power Platform with GitHub Actions. So tune in and we'll help you configure your CI/CD. Hey everyone, and welcome to the DevOps Lab. With us this week, I have a very special guest, Kartik. Kartik, welcome to the DevOps Lab. Your first time on the show.
I know, April. It's been a while. Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to have you. You have a really cool topic we're going to talk about today. But before we get into that, tell everyone what it is you do out there for Microsoft.
So for Microsoft, I am responsible for building all the developer tooling or developer solutions, if you will, for our low-code platform, which is Power Platform. In a nutshell, what low-code platforms do is actually help you build wonderful apps without necessarily having the IDE interface that we're all so used to, and build some of these very rich experiences in that context. But having said that, my job is to make sure that low-code application development does not look like completely alien to developers when they're using low-code applications to build wonderful experiences.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm excited about Power Platform because you can do so much with it. So I'm really excited to have you on today. And we always have people asking about, how do I automate this with GitHub Actions? So you're going to show us how to do that today.
Absolutely, absolutely. As a matter of fact, that's something that my team has actually gone ahead and built to that effect, because one of the reasons why this becomes a big issue is because typically when you start building applications or low-code applications in organizations, they start off as, someone to kind of kick the tires kind of thing. And then eventually the utility of that app becomes so big that now, folks who are DevOps engineers now to install, have it go through their own governance paradigm and actually deploy it. And actually start doing CI/CD and so on and so forth. So that's one of the reasons why we now have the ability to integrate low-code application platforms like Power Platform and integrate that directly into Azure DevOps. Oh, damn it!
GitHub Actions. All right, Kartik. Let's see some GitHub Actions. Take it away.
All right. So let's start off with this. Okay. So from a GitHub Action standpoint, when we first start off, there's always an app. All right. So in this case, just for grins and giggles, I'm going to go over to my app. And so when I go into Power Platform, this is what it looks like. All right. And so in this case, I have this editing surface, but this doesn't tell us much. What I'm going to do is now select and go ahead and select edit. And over here, this is now going to load up the environment. Now, remember this, as an ASP.NET developer, or let's say someone building a Node.js app, remember, you have to build the entire stack and everything else before you can actually start writing your front-end application. In the case of Power Platform, you're only focusing on the front-end application development aspect of things and not necessarily have to rebuild the entire stack, because it's all self-contained within the Power Platform environment. And that's a very crucial distinction there, is the fact that the environments that we perceive as dev, test, and prod, you have similar analogous behaviors, but these are all self-contained and hosted in the cloud by Microsoft in this case. All right.
And that's important because so often as a developer, we're given that dusty box in the corner and our production environment doesn't match our test environment or our development environment. So we're not testing or writing code for like environments.
Exactly. So this is now, in this case, we just abstract all that for you and then have it all self-contained in that environment. So let me kind of show you something here. I know this looks like a little bit like PowerPoint, but it is with just a little bit more smartness of coding in the background. So here I actually have a simple mixed reality app for all intents and purposes, and all the different screen experiences that I've captured over here. All right. Now, what I'm not going to show you is just kind of the drag and drop aspect of things, but let's just say the fact that this is the app before I go ahead and take it from my dev environment and deploy it to prod and so on and so forth. I just want to make sure this thing works. And it has two components. It's got corals, all right? So I can look at different corals, reef occupants, and I want to see, okay, you know what? I want to go place this in my house somewhere. Before I do that, I want to be able to go look at it and see three-dimensionally, how does it fit? So here I can do all these fancy things. So this is actually a proper mixed reality app that you can deploy to a mobile device, and then you can walk around and do things that way. So now, obviously, I haven't deployed it to my mobile device as of yet. Before I do that, I want to put it up in my prod area, from which I will then deploy into an app store, so to speak. So for our discussion today here to April is the fact that my focus will primarily be to take this app as is in its entirety and deploy it to test and prod as the case may be. All right?
Okay.
All right. So now we know that this app functions well and things of that nature. And when I mentioned about environments in particular, you look over here, I have Contoso Sales, Prod, and my QA. So these are the three environments that I'm going to be working in, right? So my goal here in this case is going from dev to QA to prod. Now, when I develop applications inside Power Platforms, they're usually contained in something called a solution. All right. So in this case, my solution is called Power Demo. All right. So in this case, that's what I have. I have several other experiences or several other solutions, as you can see in my environment, where I've got things like Power BI, packed in along my app. I've also got an employee experience, an onboarding app that I'm currently building. So I've got a whole bunch of things running over here, but I'm really concerned. What I'm focused on primarily is this. The other thing you'll notice is it'll say managed or unmanaged. In regular developer parlance, what that essentially means is that when something is not managed, it is immutable, as in you can go change things, develop it, and so on and so forth. Things that are managed are locked down. So if you see over here, I see Creator Kit as a canvas. It's a managed instance, and that is because it's a library that I depend on. So similar things like when we were building applications where you have DLLs and so on and so forth, those same constructs also apply in the context of low code as well.
Okay, cool.
All right. So let's go ahead and kick it off. So now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my GitHub instance. One thing I also wanted to let you know was the fact that we actually have the ability to work with Power Platform directly inside Codespace. So this is my Codespace environment directly in here. And I have my little Power Platform icon showing up right there. All right. And here I can go ahead and refresh things like that. So if there's anyone that wants to even go as a code first developer, if I want to go ahead and develop applications directly inside natively on top of GitHub, I can do that. All right. That's my solution right there. My Canvas app shows up there, and that's my mixed reality app being rendered in the context that is code first savvy. So a lot of code first developers would just be, at home working with PowerApps in an environment that they're comfortable and aware of.
That's pretty cool. And we'll put more stuff about Codespaces for everyone watching. But to get started on Codespaces, they're a secure development environment that are portable. They're secured, and you can literally launch them anywhere. So they're an awesome tool. I love them.
Oh, they're amazing. I mean, it's ever since they've released, I happen to be one of the few folks that was in the early access individuals. I fell in love with it the day they made it available.
I fell in love with them back when they were called Visual Studio Codespaces.
I know.
Back in the day. They were awesome, and they've enabled so many people to get coding so fast. So yeah, cool. Sorry, we're in GitHub. What's next?
All right, so now we're in GitHub, and as you're aware, inside GitHub, when you create your CI/CD workflows, you're inside this workflow environment. Now, one thing to note: these actions are available on GitHub Marketplace. So if I look at my environment here, or in this case, all these actions that are being referred to are coming from the Microsoft Power Platform Actions repo within GitHub. All right, so these are not something extraneous or somewhere the other sort. Now, what we have is we have these steps identified directly in these environments. Now, I usually try to go ahead and make things, when I'm writing my CI/CD scripts and things of that nature, I usually use a lot of variables in place because the values can change. Yep, all right, absolutely. But I'm using simple things, even things like one of the things as a former DevOps engineer myself, please, to everyone who's using DevOps there, whether it be in GitHub or in Azure DevOps, use service principles as much as possible and not have user identities, because there have been cases where once we've enabled MFA, because every organization needs to be secure, your CI/CD, and once you enable that and you don't have it configured properly for your CI/CD pipeline, your CI/CD pipelines are the first ones to break when you enable
yes,
MFA.
Every single time.
So I have scars.
I do too. I've cried a lot of tears. No, but absolutely. And use those secrets. And I see in your workflow, you're also using GitHub environments. So yes, when you're talking about deploying these different environments, we can reuse this workflow and then call the environment we're deploying to. So you've called and you've separated out those different environments. So you've given them different client IDs, tenant IDs, so that they're completely separate. So if there is a breach in one environment, they are literally completely segmented from each other.
Exactly. And that's the other thing too, is that even when you're using service principles, for example, there's a separate service principal identity that you use from dev to QA, and then even from QA to prod as well. So in this case, you can continuously keep on minimizing your overall blast radius as the case may be. So, yes, we're doing a demo, yes, but from a best practice perspective, that's definitely something that one has to consider in this context.
And is this workflow file going to be available for people to see in this GitHub repo afterwards?
Absolutely. This is actually a public repo. And not
Thank
only that, we actually have a lab called Microsoft Power Platform Actions Lab, where all these scripts, anytime I make a new script or anything of that sort, it's already made available there.
Okay.
So users are more than welcome to go try these things out at the lab. There's some hands-on lab that people can get started, set up their own pipelines, do wonderful things in that context there.
Awesome. And we will also put these links for everyone in the show description so they can go to them when they want to follow along.
All right. So let's give it a shot here. So now inside my workflows here, let me just go ahead. I have a couple of things here just to kind of grins and giggles here, right? So I have my export solution. So what happens in this case is I'm exporting the artifact into and preserving it first into my source code environment. One of the great things about this is the fact that once something is persisted in your GitHub repository, if somehow the PowerApp platform environment gets obliterated, I don't know how that would happen, but if it does happen, you can create a net new environment and rehydrate back from source code. So that's some of the capability that we have provided as part of this effort. So now you can actually go do some of that work as it is. So, but what we'll do is, because we're assuming the fact that this is an empty repository in this case, we'll first export the solution, unpack it, check it in, all right? And then from there, we'll go ahead and build it. So it'll now take it from my, in this case, my QA server or QA environment also acts as my build environment. So it's going to build these artifacts and then create this immutable object from my QA instance and then load it up into my prod environment. All right.
Awesome.
So let me first kick off this one over here. And again, anyone who's who's built CI/CD pipelines before, it's very easy for them to go look at. So in this case, I've created the workflow instance. So the way I'm going to kick off this workflow is manually. So one of the reasons why I like doing that is because I can specify different values and things of that nature. But you can also go ahead and use a webhook or other instances the way to trigger off these pipelines. But just for my sake, and for the demo in particular, I just usually use the manual workflow instantiation in this case, right? So in this case,
and most people probably tend to do an initiation on checking out, putting a pull request into their main branch, et cetera, so they can run in that dev environment, et cetera. So think of that when you do it. But yes, for the demo, manual is always good.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and kick off run workflow. Now, one thing to also understand is the CI/CD pipeline or the work capability that we've now brought into place. This actually is multi-platform, so you can actually you don't have to go ahead and use just Windows runners. You can actually use Linux. You can even use Mac runners as well to go ahead and build some of these capabilities in and of itself. So in this case, it's going to, whenever it actually finds the a runner instance, there we go, refreshed. Now, if I go in and look at that over here, it's going ahead and doing things. All right. So in this case, the pipeline is setting up my job. It's going to go kick off the checkout. So it's going to go check out the repository, contact or authenticate to the actual backend environment, the Power Platform environment, export the artifact, extract it, check it in, and that's where we'll stop the first instance. All right. And I'm going to walk you through the way the repo looks like. And then from there, we'll go in and kick off the release and stage in that context there. All right. Cool. So this usually takes a little bit of time here. So setup job, it's going ahead, have to go fetch a VM from the pipeline there and then set things up. Okay, so as you saw, now that we've had now with our run here, so this is what I mentioned, right? So here first goes off. It authenticated to the backend environment. This is the Power Platform environment, my dev environment. From there, it then proceeded to export the solution. Okay, and then went ahead and there's an unpack action, which what it does, it takes that library that it just downloaded from the environment and unpacks it to make it so I can check it in as regular files within my source code repository.
Awesome.
All right. And again,
you're right. So if we do lose in our environment, we could literally redeploy.
You got it. Exactly. And in this case, now that I've gone ahead and unpacked everything, once that is done, then I just use my standard Git commands inside my steps to go ahead and check in the artifacts directly. So here I just do a Git commit all. for all intents and purposes, and that just goes ahead and commits it. Now, for simplicity's sake, I've gone ahead and just checked in everything onto my main branch. You can do that as well. You can also go ahead and create a separate branch and store things there and run a proper PR loop in this context as well. One thing to also note is I know there are a bunch, and this is specifically to Power Platform users or developers that are working with Power Platform in particular. There's a tendency to go ahead and unpack the Canvas application. My request is please don't do that, even though we have the tools available to make that happen. It's just that because there are certain types of file formats that Git does not understand how to diff and merge properly. So you usually see something called a noisy diff, where you have like 100,000 diffs for just one change you might have gone ahead and done. So that is something that I usually recommend people not to go do. If you want to go edit the Canvas app, please edit the Canvas app in the Power Platform UI and not directly from Git in that context.
That's a really, really good point, Kartik. That will save people a lot of grief. I've been down that road.
All right. So now that we have that, I'm going to go ahead and just quickly stage or run my stage workflow here. So let me just go back up. All right. And I'm going to go back here and select my release solution to prod. And so here we go. Now we have our release solution to prod. And again, I'm using the standard workflow dispatch event trigger in this case. All right. Again, same thing. It's off my main branch. So there we go. I've got a bunch of variables identified here. Want to make sure that I've kept the solution name here. And then what I'm going to go do is just do run workflow again. Okay. So in this case, it'll go ahead and kick off, get a runner again. Now, on the GitHub side right now, just for simplicity's sake, I'm using Windows runners. But again, like I said before, you can use Mac and Linux as well. The reason why you use Windows runners in particular, again, this is again more targeted towards the platform users. If you're using things like packages, which are essentially a container to have multiple solutions in together and you want to deploy, the package deployment infrastructure within Power Platform still uses .NET 4.8. So in order to create packages, please use Windows runners instead of Linux. We do not support Mono or on both Linux or Mac, but use the proper .NET 4.8 libraries there because that's what is needed to actually create the packaging construct. Awesome. But other than that, but for creating solutions and things like that, go ahead and use Mac and Linux without a problem. Sorry, April, go ahead.
No, as I say, that's awesome. I love these like tidbits and tricks because these are the things that save us time when we're deploying that we don't recognize. Because I always default to a Linux-based runner because there's a cost difference to that unless I need a Windows-specific package. And you just nailed it. Why we need that. So it's .NET versioning. Yay.
Yeah. Well, we are working towards making this all .NET Core enabled. So cool. It's just work that's currently underway. Once we get the .NET Core capability baked in, then you can, again, you're back to using your favorite Linux runners or even Mac images in that context to go deploy.
Cool.
All right. So again, now we've got our runner identified. So we're just going ahead and setting up downloading all the various different actions. All right. And we're just going to let this thing run through again. So here, we actually, within this particular workflow, there were two key jobs that were running. One was taking it to QA, making sure we ran our, whatever perfunctory test that we had to go run for the sake of the demo. And then from there, generated this immutable artifact and stored it into our GitHub staging area. And then we kicked off this whole release to production. Rather, I've misnamed or mistyped the actual job here, but take from staging and release it to prod in this case. All right. Okay. So in this case, if I just will go look at the convert to manage, a couple of things that we do. So one, you have this, like we unpacked in the prior event, right? When we exported the artifact from the dev environment. So now we're packaging it all together and getting it ready to take it into QA. All right. And before we actually take it into QA, we actually have this utility called check solution, which allows us to make sure that if there are changes that have happened, let's say someone went ahead and modified something directly accessing the solution from the Git environment, you can still check, make sure that everything is still in line or copacetic before you actually bring it into your QA or /build environment in this case. We run the import. All right. Now, after the import, what we end up doing here is we export it, but this time around, what we do is we select the managed operation. All right. And what that does, it actually creates this particular, so if you look at this parameter, it says managed true. So what it does now is goes to the QA environment, or in this case, my build environment, and again, exports the artifact, but now makes it available only in the managed context, as in it creates that immutable unit that you now want to go ahead and deploy to your target. All right.
Awesome. Yeah,
So,
that's pretty straightforward.
yeah. So that's and again, it's we wanted to make sure that was the case, that it didn't look like some kind of an out of body experience for people that are so used to running GitHub pipelines to actually have to go and contort things when working with Power Platform.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people that are watching this maybe have not put in CI/CD with their Power Platform. So this is a great way to get started, and
Exactly.
having workflow files I can get started from.
Exactly. And then so if I now just the last piece here,
Mhm.
same thing. Now the only difference was, which I didn't mention when I was showing you the convert to manage stage, was the fact that I did not go ahead and check in the immutable file into my GitHub repository. What I instead did was, GitHub has an environment variable where you can actually go store it in the staging area. So all I did was essentially import it directly from the staging area. This is a just-in-time path that it creates. GitHub creates during a CI/CD pipeline.
Mhm.
So directly from there, I just fetched it from the staging area and then uploaded that directly into my Power Platform environment, which is in this case in prod. All right. So in this case, when I go do that, that's essentially, so what I've done so far is taken some artifacts directly from dev, all right, posted them into QA, and then from there and put them into prod in this context. All right.
Awesome.
And that's how I've actually gone ahead and covered up my entire CI/CD loop in this case.
Cool.
All right. And just give me a sec, and let me just quickly go over to show the deployment that has actually happened. So if I go into, all right, so there we go. Yep. And there we go. So in this case, if I want to go look at my QA environment to make sure that the deployment actually happened, well, now you see it. It's right there with the appropriate version number that I want. And in this case, this is my QA environment. I would see a similar flow happening in my prod environment as well.
Awesome. So easily traceable end to end. You can check the versioning. That's DevOps with Power Platform.
Exactly.
So Kartik, is there anything else that we missed with GitHub Actions?
Well, one, like I said, this is it. It's as simple as that. When it comes to, we've tried our best. And again, if there are things that are, there may be cases where sometimes the experience may not be optimal. We are more than happy to get feedback. As a matter of fact, a lot of what I'll do is I'll also share the link where users can go ahead and submit the issues. It is a GitHub repo, yep. So you can submit the issues right then and there itself. And our team is pretty responsive. We try to respond as quickly as we can directly via GitHub about some of the issues. So when things do go sideways, feel free to go ahead and reach out to us on GitHub, and we'll be more than happy to answer questions.
Awesome. Kartik, thank you so much for showing us how to get started with Power Platform and GitHub Actions. And for everyone out there watching, we will put all the links that Kartik very kindly showed us so you can get started with some really easy to use actions. And we'll see you all next time on the DevOps Lab.